The transformation from frog to perfect guy. She was hot. She was hot, and she knew it. The two girls with her weren't bad, but they wouldn't even go near her. An endless stream of guys would head to her table, and after a couple minutes of conversation, she would send them away. Soccer players, baseball players, and all the other athletes wanted to sit with her at her table in the school cafeteria, but she turned them all away. I sat and watched and wished I had the guts to try, but if she wanted nothing to do with the elite of the school, what chance did a bookworm like me have? Not one, I thought, not a chance. Bobby is a bookworm. That was me. The guy with the worst case of acne. The guy who sat in the back of the classroom. The shy guy who kept to himself. 2 years went by, and Bobby, the bookworm, fixed some things. The acne was gone, but my face was so covered in scars and pits that it looked like a golfer with spiky shoes had walked all over it. I was a shy guy, and I was still sitting in the school cafeteria looking across the room at the table where she sat with her two friends. And then the strangest thing happened. She looked in my direction, our eyes met, and she smiled at me. I knew it as surely as I knew my own name. She wasn't smiling in my direction. She wasn't smiling while looking into space. She was smiling at me. The bell rang, heralding the end of lunch period and breaking the spell, and we all got up and wandered off to our next class. I didn't have a general class with her in the afternoon. I saw her again in my first 2 classes the next day. I thought she glanced in my direction once or twice, but I was probably mistaken. I was sitting alone at a table in the cafeteria, as I usually did when she and her 2 friends were in line. I watched her pay the cashier like everyone else. Then she looked around for a free table, and everyone watched to see where they would go. It was the most attractive sight in the world. The cashier gave her change, and she looked around the room. There were several empty tables on the east side of the room and none on the side where I was sitting, although there were 3 empty seats at my table. She turned and headed toward the empty seats at my table, and behind her back I saw her 2 friends look at each other confusedly before following her. She walked over to my table, looked at me, and said, "Can we join you?" I was too stunned to say a word, but she knew that the odds of me saying no were comparable to the moon actually turning out to be a big piece of cheese, so she sat down. She looked at me and said, "Robert, right?" I nodded affirmatively. "So tell me, Robert, why do you sit here every lunchtime and watch me like a hawk?" Her friends shifted their gaze from her to me, and then back to her again, and the "what is going on here" was as clear on their faces as it was in my mind. I was shy, but it was that shyness that kept me from approaching people, but I'm not obtuse. I smiled and said, "Beauty attracts the eye. Extreme beauty draws the eye and holds it." That seemed to surprise her. This asshole wasn't a clown with a saggy jaw? I had no idea what she was thinking at that moment. I wasn't the kind of guy privy to the thoughts of a goddess. She gave me a dazzling smile and asked, "If that's true, why didn't you ever come over to talk to us?" What, me, a commoner, would approach the throne? She laughed and said, "We could stand a steady diet of that kind of flattery, couldn't we, girls?" Her 2 friends, Carol and Bev, smiled crookedly, clearly showing that they had no idea what was going on. "Seriously," she said, "why haven't you ever talked to me before?" I could turn this against you. We've been in the same class for over 3 years. Why haven't you ever talked to me? Because I am the queen bee and all males have to approach me, not me to them. And then she laughed and said, "The truth is that I was a rather superficial, arrogant fool. I was so used to all the handsome guys fawning over me that I never paid much attention to guys who looked like you." At these words, Bev and Carol's breath caught. She laughed again and said, "I'm a queen, and a queen can say whatever she wants." She looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You know what you look like, so you're not surprised that I see you the same way, right?" I shrugged and said, "No, not really." "Good. We start with no illusions." "We're starting?" "That's right, Bob. Here we go. Meet me after school, and you can take my books home." Carry your books? Figure of speech, Robert. I usually go out the east door. Then she changed the subject to who to vote for in the election for prom king and queen, and we talked over lunch. When the bell rang, she said, "East door at 3. I'll see you there." She left, leaving me sitting there wondering what just happened. Stupefied, yes. Stupid, no. At 3 o'clock, I was standing on the steps by the east door when she came out. Bev and Carol were with her, and when they saw me waiting, I noticed them glancing over. Each silently asked, "Do you know what's going on here?" But there was no surprise on her face when she saw me because she knew I would be there. She held out her book bag to me, and I took it. At the foot of the stairs, she turned right, but I took her hand and led her to the left. She looked at me questioningly, and I said, "Be patient, my queen. It will all become clear soon." We reached the student parking lot and a 1993 Ford Mustang convertible. I opened the passenger door, bowed low, and said, "The carriage is served, my queen." Neither of us had seen the car before, which wasn't so strange since I hadn't seen it myself until last night. It was my 18th birthday, but it had been decided that we would celebrate it on Saturday, so I wasn't expecting anything until then. Mom told me to take out the trash while she made dinner, and Dad got the plates and utensils out to set the table. I walked out the door into the adjoining garage where the garbage cans were and stopped like a dumbfounded man when I saw a navy-colored Mustang with a white convertible. It had a huge red bow on it and a ribbon that said, "Happy birthday, Rob!" I just stood there looking at him. Mom and Dad came up behind me. Mom said, "Happy birthday, darling," and Dad said, "The color is a little nasty, but you're young enough that it matches you." Mom hit him with her fist and said, "Shut up. It's beautiful, and I'm mad you didn't give it to me and give Rob my clumsy van." "I can't give it to you," Dad said. "If you drive that car, I'll have to fight everyone off with a stick, and I'm too old for that." Mom laughed and said, "You're kind of old, decrepit. Maybe Rob will lend me the car one night and I can go on a cruise and find some man to keep up with me." Dad said, "I'll show you old and decrepit." And he picked her up and put her on his shoulder and carried her toward the bedroom, and she laughed and told him to put it down. I held the door open so Bev and Carol could sit in the back, and she climbed in front on the white leather seat while I lowered the lid. I started the engine, turned to her, and said, "Where would my queen like to go?" That's how my relationship with Melissa Ann Courtney began. We headed to Bev's house and then to Carol's, and she said she would call them later. Once we were alone, she said, "Why don't we drive through the driveway, have a couple cups of Coca-Cola, and go to the park?" I listen and obey my queen. She laughed and said, "I should have found you sooner. I've been here all this time. Tell me about yourself." "There's not much to tell. I'm a little shy and keep mostly to myself, except for half a dozen really good friends. I mostly go to school, study, and spend time in the library 3 to 4 times a week." "Why spend so much time in the library?" "I belong to a chess club that meets there on Tuesdays and a book discussion group that meets there on Thursdays. On Wednesdays, I read books to a group of 4, 5, and 6-year-olds. "I've noticed you don't play sports." "Yes. I'm not attracted to competition. I play tennis with my mom on the weekends and sometimes bowl with my dad, but most of the time I work out at the gym my dad set up in our basement. But enough about me. Why did the queen find this lowly commoner worthy of her attention?" She was silent for a moment, and just as she was about to say something, we pulled up to the burger barn and pulled into the driveway. I ordered 2 nice lunches and then drove across the street to the park, got out, walked over to the picnic table, and sat down. She took a bite out of her hamburger and took a sip of her Coke, then said, "The truth can hurt, but given the way you took my remark about your appearance, I think you'll do fine. You could say I'm a superficial, arrogant fool, and that's true, but I never realized it. I didn't need to realize it because I was too busy being adored and fawned over. Boys had been flocking to me since I was 12, and I had a choice. If the one I chose turned out to be a toad, so what? Just dump him and pick another. I never had a shortage of dates, and I didn't care. And it could have gone on forever if I hadn't overheard a conversation between my mom and dad. I wasn't supposed to be in the house. I was supposed to stay the night at Carol's house, but she was sick, so I went home. Apparently, my parents didn't hear me come in and they were talking about me. My father was worried about my future if I didn't change my habits. He remarked that all my boyfriends were empty-headed athletes, and if you took the last 5 I dated and put all their brains together, you still couldn't see them without a microscope. He said the only reason any of them spent any time studying at all was because they had to maintain a C average or they couldn't play sports. My mom said it wasn't that bad, and besides, I was still young and having fun like I should at my age. My dad said that's true, but he's afraid I'll take my taste for boys with me when I leave for college this fall and end up with some chump whose only desire is to play pro ball. I went up to my room, thought about what he'd said, and realized he was right. The only guys I dated were good-looking athletes. Many weren't as dumb as my dad portrayed, but almost all of them were interested in sports, and it seemed to be all they talked about. When I practiced, it was never with the guy I was dating at the time. It was always with Bev, Carol, or a couple of other girlfriends. I tried to remember the last time I'd had a meaningful conversation with one of my boyfriends, but I couldn't remember any. My father was right. I had been choosing my boyfriends based on looks alone, and it had come to my attention that the reason I was changing boyfriends so quickly was because, other than looks, they had nothing to attract and hold my interest. I thought about it for a couple days and decided I needed to see how the other half was doing. I looked around and saw you. I wanted to get away from the lusciously handsome guys. I wanted someone my dad wouldn't consider just another chump, and like I said, you were there. But even so, you got lucky. I spotted you yesterday, sitting alone at lunch, and I thought, wow, Lissa, there he is. The perfect guy. Not the prettiest or the most athletic, but he's on the honor board every semester. So I headed over to your table, and here we are. So what do you think of your queen now? So I'm a social experiment? Why don't we just say you're participating in a project? A project? Yes. The project is to try to change a narcissistic, arrogant, superficial fool into something else. Are you up to the task? Probably not. She raised an eyebrow and I said, "You said it yourself about 4 hours ago that you never paid much attention to guys who looked like me. The problem is, you're not the only girl with that attitude. I'm 18 and I've never been on a date with a girl, and not for lack of trying. I don't have the slightest idea what I can do to help with your project." You're kidding me, aren't you? Not in the slightest. I've never met a girl who wanted to date a guy whose face looked like it had been treated with a cheese grater. She sighed and shook her head. Melissa used to be one of them. I think there are 2 projects to work on right now. 2 projects? Uh-huh, me and you. You'll be working on the Reassembling Melissa project, and I'll be working on the Turning Robert into a Social Butterfly project. Maybe they're related. Do you know how to dance? My mom made me take dance lessons when I was in 7th grade. And then? With my mom at home. She and my dad used to compete in ballroom dancing. When he goes away on business trips, she wants to dance to fill her evenings. Okay, then, the first step in what I will call the Bobby Project will be to get the other guys involved in the company of other guys on dates. The goal will be to get you ready to shine at the prom. Prom? I don't have a date to prom. I don't even know anyone I could ask to prom. Every girl I've ever asked out has turned me down. Of course you have a date, silly. You just haven't officially proposed to me yet. You're going to be my date to the prom? That depends. On what? The silly little demand known as asking. I looked at her stunned, and she said, "Repeat after me, Robert. Will you go to the ball with me, Melissa?" I stared at her in utter confusion. How could this have happened? That the prettiest and most popular girl in school was sitting on a park bench and talking to me was overwhelming in itself. That she told me to ask her to the prom defied all logic. "Come on, Robert. You can do this. Just follow me. Will you go to the ball with me, Melissa?" I pinched myself and felt pain, so I realized it wasn't a dream. I took a breath and asked, "Miss Courtney, would you do me the honor of letting me accompany you to the prom?" "I thought you'd never ask." "Of course I would. Now that we have that settled, we need to see your mother." "My mom? For what?" "If she's competed in ballroom dancing, she knows how important it is to be synchronized partners. We need her to see us together so she can give us feedback. As you've noticed, Robert, I'm the queen, and the queen will need to reign supreme at the prom. When would be a good time?" "I'll ask when I get home." She looked at me, and I found that she was pretty good at reading facial expressions. "What are you thinking, Robert?" "I find it hard to believe that so close to prom, the prettiest and most popular girl in the senior class doesn't already have a partner. But mostly I find it hard to believe that you want to go to prom with me. I've been asked by half a dozen guys, and I turned them down because I had a hard time choosing between them. I've already told you why I never dated the same guy for very long, and all the guys who asked me out were just like the ones I kept changing. They were all cut from the same cloth, the same mold, so to speak. Prom is supposed to be special, and I was hoping for something better. Then I reevaluated, and here we are. As your queen, I'm going to assign you a task. Your queen's prom is special. Do it, and your queen may grant you a knighthood or kiss you and turn you from a frog to a prince. Fail your queen, and she may keep you a frog forever. I listen and obey my queen." She laughed. "You're a big dummy. I should have checked on the frogs sooner." I took her home and walked her to the door. She kissed me on the cheek and said she would see me at school the next day. At dinner, I told my mom that I had a date to the prom and that Melissa wanted some help with our dance. Mom offered to bring her home after school. I called Melissa, and she didn't appear to have any plans for the day and was looking forward to dancing with me. Melissa and I had 2 classes together in the morning, and at the end of the second one, she told me to save her a seat at my table during lunch. When I sat down in the dining room, I felt like everyone was looking at me, and I wondered what it was all about. I found out when Melissa and the ubiquitous Bev and Carol joined me at my table. Melissa told the guys who asked her out that she wasn't going to prom with them. She told Carol, Bev, and a few other guys that she would go with me, and the school rumor spread the news. Melissa asked me if I would mind if Carol and Bev went with her to my house. At 3 o'clock, I waited for them at the east door, and we drove to my house. Mom and Melissa seemed to instantly hit it off, and after a little conversation, Mom said, "Okay, you two, let's see what you've got there." We walked into the wood-floored living room. Mom put on the CD we usually dance to and turned it on. The first number was a waltz, and it was immediately clear that Melissa couldn't dance. I mean, she could dance like most teenagers, but she wasn't up to ballroom dancing standards. I was making her look bad. Not at all what I wanted for my queen. Mom said, "You need some work, honey. Let me show you what it should look like." She held out her hand to me and pressed the play button again, and I led Mom around the room until the tune ended. Then Mom said, "We have to do one of 2 things. Either Bobby has to dance quieter, or we have to get you up." "I vote for bringing me up," said Melissa. "How am I supposed to do that?" "Hard work, honey. Hard work and time. How much time is there?" "Every minute I'm not in school, including weekends." "What do we have? 2 weeks until graduation?" Melissa nodded affirmatively. "Okay then, every night after school and all day Saturday. If we get good results, we can skip Sundays." She turned to me and said, "That means you'll be in charge of making dinner when your father gets home. Are you all right?" "No problem." "He's cooking too?" Melissa asked. "My Bobby is a man of many talents. Sooner or later, some very lucky young lady will realize what he's like." I blushed, and Mom told me that I wouldn't be needed for the afternoon class, but to be ready to work hard the next day. Heading for the kitchen, I heard Bev ask if she and Carol could watch. I didn't hear what Mom said, but I was sure she would be fine. As I drove the girls home, they talked about dresses and other prom stuff, and at Melissa's door I got another kiss on the cheek, and she told me to remember to save her a seat at my table for the next day. The next day, I was late for lunch, and when I got there, Melissa, Carol, and Bev were already sitting at the table. But the fourth seat was taken by Ray Hendricks, so I found a seat at the other end of the cafeteria. Melissa showed up at the east door alone at 3 o'clock that afternoon, and as we drove to my house, she apologized for not leaving me a seat at the table. Ray sat down before I could tell him I was saving a seat for you. He started talking to Bev about their prom date, so I couldn't chase him away. I shrugged, and we turned into the driveway. We were just entering the house when I found out why Carol and Bev weren't with Melissa when she got out of school. Ray pulled up in front of the house, and he and Bev got out of the car as Carol and Steve Miller stopped behind him. I looked at Melissa. Your mom said she would also be working with Bev, Carol, and their beau. I just shrugged and said, I think the Queen's Court should look nice. And we went inside. Mom was in her element. She's like a dance instructor just waiting to come out of the closet. She spent the day showing the basics, using me as a visual aid, about an hour before Daddy was due home, and then I had to head to the kitchen and start making dinner. When Dad got home, he was working with Mom on a lesson, and about 7:30 it was over, and Mom came in and told me that Melissa was staying for dinner. Dad pretty much dominated the conversation at the dinner table, asking Melissa about herself, her family, what she was going to study in college, and what her goals in life were. When dinner was over, he said he would take care of the cleaning so I could work with my mom and Melissa. At 9 o'clock, I drove Melissa home, and as soon as we pulled away from my house, she said, Okay, Robert, come on. What? Why did you get that long face when Ray and Steve came over with Bev and Carol? I spent most of my high school years with girls who had almost nothing to do with me, and then my fairy godmother took pity on me and waved her magic wand. The magic dust settled, and here you are. It's the only possible explanation. And as the fairy, Godmother only gave Cinderella until midnight. I know that I will only have a short time with you, and I don't think I want to share the little time I will have with anyone else. She didn't say anything back to that, but what could she say? She knew it was true. I walked her to the door, and she turned to me with a strange look on her face as she told me she would see me at school the next day. She leaned over and kissed me. Not on the cheek, but on the lips. Then she turned around and went inside. When I got home, Dad said he'd order pizza for tomorrow night's dinner and he'd take over all the kitchen chores on Saturday, so I'd have more time to work with Melissa. Hey, I think you have a good girl, and we should do everything we can to keep her with you. Friday at lunch, all the talk was about dances and prom dresses. Then I was asked what dances I thought would be played. I said it was more likely that half would be waltzes and the rest fast numbers based on current popular tunes. And I assumed there would be at least one each of tango, cha-cha, and samba. Do we have time to learn them? Carol asked. Maybe some basics, I replied. Of course, Carol had to bring it up that evening, and of course, Mom took it as a challenge. How badly do you want to work? She asked. We can work late tonight and all day tomorrow. You'll need to be here Sunday most of the day, and next week work a couple hours longer still. We have tonight, all of this weekend, and all of next week and the weekend. I think we can do it, but you won't have time for anything else. I could tell Ray and Steve weren't interested in doing it, but Melissa, Carol, and Bev were all for it, so Ray and Steve dragged along. It was either that or lose their girlfriends 13 days before prom. We worked until 10, and then I drove Melissa home. We were almost to Melissa's house when she said, Your queen is furious. And what on earth did this lowlife do to upset his queen? We haven't been on a date yet. We've spent all this time together, and we still haven't gone on a date. This lowly man apologizes, but at the risk of incurring the wrath of his queen, he has to say that it was the queen who made the decision to fill all her free time with dance lessons. She looked at me for a moment before saying, I must have done wrong. Before I reached her house, she told me to take a left on Jerry Street. Why are we doing this? Be patient, you'll see. She made me take a right, and I looked at her questioningly because we had hit a dead end. At the end of the block, she told me to pull over and park. I did as she said, and then she said, "Get in the back." When she got out of her side and moved toward the back door, I followed her. It doesn't look like we're going to be able to find time for a date before graduation, and I'll be damned if I'm going to wait another 13 days to do it. We can't do it in the front because of the bucket seats, center console, and gear shift, so we'll have to do it here. Kiss me. Was I going to argue? You weren't kidding when you said you've never had a girlfriend in your life, were you? If there were, they certainly didn't teach you how to kiss. Here, let me show you. And she did. After a couple minutes, she said, "Not bad, but we'll have to spend some time working on it," and then tried to find my lips again. Another half hour passed before she said it was time for me to take her home. The kiss goodbye at the front door was a little tense, and I drove home, thanking my fairy godmother profusely. It may not last long, but I will have some very fond memories. The next 10 days went the same way. On Saturdays and Sundays, we worked 12 hours a day under the supervision of an overseer, which was my mother. Monday through Friday was school, and after school there were 4 more hours of lessons. The following Saturday and Sunday were also 12-hour days. Every night when I drove Melissa home, we kissed. Sometimes I felt like Melissa was waiting for me to do something, but I didn't know what. When I got home after driving Melissa home from Sunday's session, Mom told me that she thought Melissa and I were almost good enough to compete. "You've always been ready, baby, but Mel needs a little more work. Carol would be happy too if she had a better partner, but here, unfortunately, Bev and Ray don't have what it takes. They will shine at the prom, but it will be because most of the other kids aren't getting lessons." "Do you really think we're doing that well?" "I bet you do, baby." I went to bed that night feeling pretty darn good. That good feeling was with me for the rest of the 4th hour. At the end of the 2nd hour of class, Carol asked me to meet her at the east door before going to the cafeteria for lunch. I was there waiting for her to come out. She came up to me and hesitated. She wanted to say something but didn't seem to know what to say or how to say it. I tried to help. "Come on, Carol. As you can imagine, I'm used to hearing bad news from girls. I can handle it. Mel is my best friend, and I don't usually get involved in her business. But in the last couple of weeks, I've realized what a great guy you are and what a great family you have. I wouldn't want to, but I'm afraid Mel will hurt you. I know why she spends time with you, but I also know her, Rob. I know you're not the kind of guy who will hold her interest for long. She'll use you to fulfill some need she feels she has, and then she'll dump you like a dozen others. I see the way you look at her, Rob, and I know how you'll feel when that happens. This whole thing touches my heart far more than I could have ever imagined. I guess I'm hoping that if I prepare you for it, it will help in some way. I appreciate your concern, Carol, but I'll be fine. I always knew it wouldn't be for long. At least I'll have a prom, and that wouldn't have happened before Melissa took an interest in me for some reason. That brings up another point. You know you can only spend part of prom night with her, right? What do you mean? She's bound to be elected homecoming queen, and Dick Harbor will probably be named homecoming king, and they'll have to spend some time together. There's a queen's court, and tradition says she has to dance with all the men of her court. I shrugged and said, at least in the record books I'll be her beau, and our picture will be in the class yearbook. That's what I'll always have. Come on, we'll be late for dinner. That night after our dance lesson, I drove Melissa home, and as soon as I pulled out of the driveway, Melissa said, "I saw Carol talking to you today. What was that all about?" I hesitated, and she said, "Come on, honey, you can tell me. Carol and I are too close for what you tell me to affect us. She says she loves me and doesn't want me to suffer." So? She more or less told me not to get too close to you. Why would she do that? The idea was that if I don't get too close, it won't hurt as much when you leave me and move on to the next conquest. And you think that's gonna happen? Given my history with the opposite sex, why not? You're a queen and I'm a mere serf, and we mere serfs know better than to try to get too high. Pull over. What? Pull over! I'd never heard her so angry, so I was shocked. But I pulled over to the curb. She turned around, climbed over the center console and gear lever, turned off the ignition and kissed me. The kiss turned into a heated kissing session. I'd never done that with other guys. None of the studs and handsome guys I've dated have ever gotten it. You're special, Robert, and you're my boyfriend. You're stuck with me, asshole, so get used to it. That was a good point, even if I didn't believe it. Tuesday and Wednesday flew by quickly, and it was prom night. I was on my way to the garage to pick up the Mustang when my dad said, "Where are you going?" "To pick up my car." "Your car is up ahead." I walked to the front door and saw a long limousine by the sidewalk. He handed me $200 bills and said, "Go!" When I got to Melissa's house and she came downstairs to greet me, she was so beautiful it almost took my breath away. If I didn't experience anything else, I at least saw this vision coming toward me. I had to pose for pictures because Melissa's mom took 20 or 30 shots with her camera, and she told me she would make a set for my mom as I walked Melissa to the door. "You might want my queen to get in her chariot," I said as I opened the front door, and Melissa walked out onto the porch and saw the limo. "And I hope it doesn't turn into a pumpkin before I get you home." Melissa turned and gave me the kind of kiss that made my knees go up, and her mother took a picture. "Could you make me 1,000 copies of this book?" I asked, and her mother laughed. All eyes were on us as we walked in. Half the audience was probably thinking, "What is she doing to him?" And most of the men in the audience were reveling in her beauty and wishing they were in my shoes. Melissa, Carol, Bev, Ray, Steve, and I dazzled the rest of the audience as we dove in and spun around. Melissa truly became prom queen, and Carol and Bev became part of her court. The biggest surprise was that Dick Harbor did not become king. Instead, the honor went to Mike Eschel, one of Melissa's former boyfriends. The biggest shock came when it was time for the king and queen to dance. Mike was smiling broadly as he approached Melissa as the orchestra played a waltz. The smile disappeared when Melissa reached out, took the crown off his head, walked over to me, put it on my head, and led me to the dance floor. Just the two of us, alone on the floor with all eyes on us. If we had been in a dance competition during this dance, we would have been sweeping the floor with the other contestants. We felt so good together. When the music finally died down, Melissa and I bowed to each other, and the hall exploded with thunderous applause. I found out later that the band leader played the waltz for an extra 3 minutes because we were dancing so well that he didn't want to stop us. Melissa took the crown off my head and gave it back to Mike, then led him out onto the dance floor for the next dance. Carol walked over to me, poked me in the ribs with her elbow and said, "Show off! Now it's my turn." That night I danced with Carol, Bev, and a few other girls because I couldn't keep Melissa with me all night, but she was with me more than half the time. There were 1 or 2 other highlights. When the orchestra played the cha-cha-cha, Mom's students were the only ones on the dance floor, and when they played the second one half an hour later, Mom's students each grabbed a partner from the crowd and took them out on the dance floor and tried to lead them through the dance. The same thing happened when the orchestra played 2 tangos. The first one was just a mom team, and the second one was a mom team pulling partners out of the crowd. During the second tango, I pulled Nancy Newbert onto the dance floor, and when I tried to get her through the dance, she said, "Damn, Rob, where have you been hiding?" I almost laughed in her face. I'd asked her out at least half a dozen times since we'd been in 9th grade together, and she'd always knocked me down. I just smiled and remained silent. The last dance was a waltz, and all was right in my world as I moved across the floor with Melissa in my arms. When the last note subsided, she kissed me and said, "You are no longer a frog, my prince." My reverie was interrupted when she sat down next to me. "Pensive?" she asked. "Not at all. Just thinking about prom." "I see. I can see you're thinking." "Yeah, that was the path that led us here." "More like 2 or 3. You want another drink?" "No, I told the babysitter we'd be home by 11's. Okay. I just need to go to the bathroom real quick. When I came back, I saw Melissa talking to Carol. Carol said something and Melissa laughed, and then Bev said something and Melissa laughed when Carol stuck her tongue out. They all hugged, and I marveled at the friendship that had lasted for over 18 years, from 6th grade to now. I had a lot of friends and good buddies, but I couldn't remember any who were as close to me as Melissa, Bev, and Carol. I walked over and gave my wife a hug. "Good night, everyone," I said as Carol and I turned around, walked out, and headed home. The end! Subscribe to my channel. Thank you.